Carolyn Holzman, and this is Confessions of an SEO. Confessions is a short-form SEO fireside chat. You're going to get an earful about search engine optimization from both a technical and non-technical point of view. I see this now as a place to share my personal and professional observations, sometimes to offer help, sometimes to vent, and sometimes to try to push our approach as professionals in the critical thinking in what we do. I've spent the last 17 years as a frontline SEO tester, and forensic SEO, and still solving this SEO puzzle creates a passion in my heart for our industry and those that we serve. Some weeks I'm absolutely certain that I'm talking to an earlier version of Carolyn who would have appreciated hearing this and who found a way to add her voice to the conversation. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 40 of Confessions of an SEO. Now, last week, we kind of walked through the likely reason for the change as we all lived through it, what was happening at the time when Google removed the support for a search parameter which practically all rank tracking and correlational search results software is built on. And I'm guessing that no one had that on their Google bingo card. So look for it. The title is called Monopoly Bingo. And you can always find the most recent episode on confessionsofanseo.com. Subscribe to Confessions on whichever platform you get your podcast if you haven't already, because your simple act is a great way to both support this podcast and help others find it. Thank you to Ahrefs, the sponsor of this episode. Did you know that you can automate technical SEO with Ahrefs? It's called Always On Audit. And it's a feature that keeps site audit running continuously in the background. You can catch SEO issues early on, get website changes indexed faster, and deploy fixes automatically. Plus, the site audit submits new and updated URLs to Index Now, so your changes get indexed in hours and not weeks. And you can even find a way to patch SEO issues without bothering your developers. You could push fixes from the site audit to your CMS via JavaScript or Cloudflare workers. Now, I may know a little something about that, and it's a successful way to test out your fixes to make sure they work before getting developers involved. You should take your successes, not your guesses, to the team. This week's topic is developed from a question I get a lot in my forensic work. People usually come with some issue on the site like, oh, my pages disappeared after the spam update. Now, I look at the site, and my goal, especially when it's more of a courtesy wellness check, is not to provide this huge long list of items that could be contributing to it. But usually I found that the first thing I can discover that based on what I know, it presents at least a 90% or higher certainty to be one of the major issues. That's why it doesn't take me that long, which is how I can afford to be generous with these spot checks. And it comes from many years of fixing things, coming in after, let's say, items have been bad, that's a technical term, for a long time, but never fixed no matter who worked on them. And so I would get to fixing them and get to watch the sales team celebrate the first month they hit more calls and form fills than they've ever seen. So I find something. And usually it's not an earth-shattering aspect of SEO or optimization. And after a minute or two, after I share that with the site owner, then the question comes, well, I see this all the time in other people's sites. Why is this a problem in my site now? Now, in the past, I've tried to answer that question on a one-to-one basis, but it seems to be so pervasive. I guess the term would be an assumption. And it makes sense, that people would have these questions because, let's face it, we're not all working from the same textbook. There's no formalized teaching about how to move from observation to discovery. Even though I called Google a jerk in last week's show, I have learned practically everything I know about SEO from Google, if I'm honest. And that's why I'm such an advocate about SEO testing, real SEO testing, not experiments, but testing protocols designed to get up into that face, the algorithm, punch it in the nose and see what happens. And that's not that easy these days with the volatility, as well as the now, at least we hope temporary, inability to get reliable correlation data. Because of Google wants two things, right? They really want to be a monopoly, and at the same time, they really want not to be called out for being one. It's like the quintessential have your cake and eat it too. But for what it's worth, learning from Google these days requires a very long view. You can't really just look at search results today and allow that to be your only roadmap to your strategy. So getting back to this question, what I found over the years doing the forensic work is usually the majority of what I find is some form of duplicate content. Now, if you're of the OG listeners to Confessions, it was way back in season 1. I talked about my SEO pet peeve. Most of my pet peeves are the words our industry uses with great confidence, but without precision. For instance, duplicate content versus syndicated content. Many use the word duplicate content when they're actually talking about syndicated content, which is the appearance of the same content on different domains. Think of that like press releases. When I refer to duplicate content, it is strictly referring to the same content on the same domain. For instance, this happens a lot on Shopify sites. So much so that if anything crosses my desk that involves a Shopify site, there's a 50% upcharge. First, because when I hear the issue, I'm already probably 95% at the cause. So it doesn't take me long, and it doesn't seem fair to penalize me for being so damn quick. Mostly, it's to cover my time answering all of the questions that are some form of, it just can't be that. I've stopped taking it as an insult when someone tells me that after I've looked at it. It's more about, I think as humans, but let's call them human site owners, are unwilling to take in anything that they consider to be so obvious that, well, it just can't be that. It's the same thing as saying it's turtles all the way down, if you get my drift. These days, a lot of local sites and lead generation local sites are built on the state, county, city, neighborhood keywords, and modifying the meta title and city names in the body of the page using essentially the same photos, layouts, maybe changing up some of the words, reformatting it, paraphrasing it. And then they get it working. And then it stops working. And they look around, and as from where they see it, it's still working for everybody else in search results. So when I walk in, invited nevertheless, to tell them that, let's look at one set of your state, county, city, neighborhood pages. It's that their neighborhood pages aren't getting served. And the most likely cause, in my experience, is duplicate content. So how do I know this? Well, when you look at them and score them, each of these pages are about 98% identical to each other. And that's just with their words. That's not to say the photos. The photos are the same. There's no map embeds on these pages. So, you can't even tell really that they're that different from each other. And the Search Console data confirms, like if you filter down to the page level, and you have to do it individually, you're not going to really see this in an aggregate display. So you have to filter down to the page. And if you compare, let's say, just looking at the diagram, the graph of impressions and the serving positional data, they're identical. And let's say both dropped out of being served in the SERPs on the same day. Now, I can understand, despite looking at the data and saying this is what's happening to you, I can understand the reluctance to accept when they look around at other sites. But here's the kicker, and this is what I've learned from studying the indexation process and the deserving process over the past 4 years of looking at this deeply. It doesn't take Google long to score and rescore modifications made to an individual page. It might take 48 hours to initially crawl, index, and serve. And after that, if you make modifications that actually increase relevancy compared to any other documents Google has for that term or phrase, you can jump 3 or more positions within less than 24 hours if Google is in running condition. And as SEOs, we think by the page, we work by the page, we see jumps by the page, and we see drops by the page. And we assume, because that's what we see, that Google only works by the page from a top to bottom, and what's on that page is what determines its success. But then Google changed a lot of things, the majority of things, with helpful content. And they have cleaned up the SERPs. They have caught a lot of dolphins with that tuna. And I'm just going to say tuna is the unhelpful content in this analogy because I'm always partial to the dolphins being the good ones. Fins up. Getting back to helpful content, this is where Google measures not just on the individual page level, but how each page on a domain topically relates to another. And this process isn't like the rescoring to resort page. That timeline is very, very different. And what we've learned is technically, this is what they call embeddings. Each page is like I'm going to use the word embed on a domain, but not in the way that we normally say it when we've embedded a page. I'm referring to the leaked Google API documentation that was back in 2024. And it revealed that Google uses techniques where, let's say, entire sites are represented in a multi-dimensional space, so to speak. And that allows Google to understand the semantic relationships between the pages on the same domain and assess, let's say, pages together on their joint relevance to specific topics already associated with the domain. Talking about topical radius. We understand the concept very well about we don't want to go too far off a topic of something, but I don't think we yet, despite, this is how the SERPs are sort of ruled now, I don't know that we understand that we can also not go far enough between pages too many times. Let me see if I can explain that. There's not enough distinction that's been made about various pages so that Google can see those pages over time as different subtopics. So, like, for instance, when I go back to the local sites, their neighborhood pages, they're not that different from each other. So Google can't really see any light in between them. And a confused Google is not something that's going to be useful to you. So anyway, through this classification process of, not just the top to bottom page, but the left to right, page A to page B to page C to page D, it doesn't happen in 24 hours. Google said that. It doesn't necessarily happen in a month, but it does eventually happen. They go through this classification process. And when the hammer comes down, it can feel like an update just rippled through your site. Sometimes It's right after an update, so you think, aha, if I know the one thing that update targeted, I can recover. But the reason why it can happen to you today and not be evident in some other random site you just found to justify why duplicate content can't be the reason. Not all sites are at the same stage in this process. Also, you don't know that all the pages that random site has in their site. That page you found could just be the one survivor. There could be dozens sort of lying dead in performance in their Search Console. So it's not that duplicate content works for someone else, and not for you. It's that it never works. The real takeaway is that Google compares page A to B and so on your domain. If you already have one page on the topic that Google knows, and you put up essentially the same content, and the only difference is you change the names enough to satisfy your mind, but not Google's classification, regardless of how successful that is at the beginning, that page is already doomed. It's like dead man walking. So create distinction. Use every keyword vector you can, especially the stronger ones like meta titles. And if you think you've been too aggressive, think again. Your job is not trying to convince SEO tools that you did it right. You're learning from Google now. That's it from me this week. Thank you for being a listener. Thank you to Ahrefs for being the sponsor of this episode. And check out the automation of the technical SEO audit with Ahrefs. If you have any questions about today's topic, you can reach out and text your question to 512-222-3132. Indexilla is my indexing tool designed to help get your pages discovered and crawled by Google. You can find it at indexilla.io. And you can become a member of my indexation group, Crawl or No Crawl, for only $18 a month, receiving status reports to answer the question, is it me or is indexing off today? And starting in October, you can submit your indexation question or issue, and I'll take a look at it. Search for Crawl or No Crawl. Thank you for listening, and until next week, I'll see you in the SERPs.